Hey, welcome once again to the Rise of the GM podcast. This is a special edition. Late, missed last Thursday, but we're back. We got one coming earlier Thursday as well, but join us now for some exciting stuff on Rise of the GM. Hey, Adam. So I was going to introduce all the stuff we're going to talk about, and we got going, and I just totally lost that out of my head. We are going to be touching on some cool stuff today, and I'm not even going to preview it. People just get to see it as it comes. But we did have a podcast that was supposed to come out last Thursday. You know, we come out every Thursday, and we want to be those regular, on-time sort of podcasters, so you can look forward to this in whatever you have to do on Thursdays. But we had an internet outage here. A competing internet company had accidentally dug into the ground and cut our fiber. Was it an accident? Was it an accident, Mediacom, or was that on purpose?
Oh, name dropped them and everything.
Name dropped and everything, Mediacom. You just know that we know it was you. And anyway, our line was cut completely, and they had to come out and like fix whatever they did. I don't know if they replaced it or if they spliced it, or I don't know what you do with fiber, but it's back. And now we have internet. And so just as we're getting ready to start today, Adam texts me and says, my entire building and maybe this whole area lost power. And it's not coming back until 8. So Adam is on a combination of a laptop battery that we hope lasts through this whole thing and a phone that we hope lasts through this whole thing. Mm-hmm. We're going to just make this work. Looks pretty good, right? Sounds good?
Okay. Yeah.
Right here. All right. Well, we're going to hit on our encounter starter like we usually do. Then we're going to talk about the facilitator is our kind of main topic for today. And then we're going to end with an NPC who's so lawful that it hurts a little bit. I'm going to let Adam kind of carry these two pieces on the end, and I'll jump us into the middle. But let's start with our encounter starter for this week.
Yeah. So this one, we're doing something a little bit different with this episode. Excuse me. And what we're going to be looking at is there is a content creator on Instagram called Dungeon Influence that I followed for a long time personally. We follow as Rise of the GM on Instagram. They just put out some really good like little prompts, and we're going to be sure to tag them in this and let them know that we're giving them some love today. But this is Game Hook 164 from Dungeon Influence, and it goes this way. An arrogant dragon master appeared from a portal above the capital. As the self-proclaimed ruler of the city, she expects everyone to follow her orders. I don't know how well this is going to translate, but here's what you can see if you go on Instagram and check out their stuff. You're on video. If you're audio, this means nothing to you. It's great radio.
He just stuck his phone up to the microphone, to the camera.
So this arrogant dragon master appears and says, I am in charge now. Bow before me. What do you think about that?
Obviously, this is the kind of thing that PCs they don't just be like, oh, that's happening, I'm just going to go on about my shopping. You know, they're going to do something about this. And so the question is, how do you build this into an encounter? What do you do to make this something great? And this is a good day to kind of do this one. That's like shorter. It's kind of a blast, and then you have to come up and create, because today we're going to be talking a little bit in the second part about improvisation and stuff. But any ideas by the way, as we started this topic, I reached for my cup of coffee to sip it like I always do, and it wasn't there because it's sitting right back there on that coffee maker. So everybody on video, watch me go back and get that coffee while Adam starts talking about what he would do. It's sitting there done. I already made it. It's just sitting there. I just got to grab it.
Great.
So go ahead. I can hear. What would you do to bring your characters into this, Adam?
Yeah. What I would want to do specifically with this is that it's legitimate, that she actually should be in charge. I think like there's...
What do you mean?
So she's appearing and she's saying, I'm the leader of the city now. And I would like that to be real, that they wouldn't know that immediately. You know, they're like, oh, this is a usurper kind of person coming in and just saying, I have a dragon so I can take over. But as things go on, realizing, no, she actually does have the claim on the throne or the claim on the city. She's the one that's been slighted. And I think being able to like make that a little more complicated for them would be cool, because the initial thing is going to be like, oh, we need to, you know, defeat that person and that dragon. And move on, kind of thing, but to make it a little more, have a little more depth in there.
So,
Yeah.
what I would do, I'm just totally playing off of what you just said. So she comes in and basically she's saying, I am now because she should be, but somehow that's been pulled from her and she's back to take it, right? She's back
Right.
to say, this is really supposed to be mine. What I would do, so what's hard is you got a dragon and a rider up in the sky. And you could say, okay, this is my encounter. All right, everybody, attack. And so you got all these people trying to figure out how to fight this thing that's in the sky that maybe swoops down, maybe shooting breath weapons, whatever she's doing from the top of it. We don't know if she's magic. She could be magic. She could be martial, ranged or not. And you could come up with what that battle's going to look like. But again, I like to do that thing where it's not just one big creature. And so to throw, I was thinking, how would I bring more into this? And I had started kind of going in this one path, but when you said, "Oh, what if she's the rightful heir?" So what if when she comes out, you have like the Wizards Guild comes out, and so this dragon's gonna in our minds. The dragon's going to try and burn down parts of the city, and maybe the wizards come out and they're like protecting their building, and then you got
Right.
the thieves guild who comes out and like they're. So what we could find out later is that two or three of these heads of the big guilds in town were the ones that ousted her, or were the ones that said, "Hey, you know what? We have an opportunity here to make this like our city. And so
Right.
what we're going to do is falsify this information or remove this information from a history or whatever that she is supposed to be here."
Yeah.
And they know that she's going to attack these guilds. So they're like, quote, protecting their guild halls. They're trying to protect it from the fire, but they're also like kind of attacking. And so then the characters are like, oh, these are our friends. And
Right.
maybe she's like initially driven off and like as she's like leaving, because you wouldn't want her to be defeated if
Yeah.
it's
Right.
possible.
Yeah.
She yells, check this prophecy at this time or whatever, something
Uh-huh.
that the PCs end up like checking. And then they find out that it was the wizards and the thieves and whatever this
Yeah.
third guild is that you could figure out
Yeah.
and throw in there, that they were the ones responsible. And so when they came out and you were helping them, you were actually helping the enemy. And
Right.
then, that leads on to whatever. Or maybe it's something that like right in the middle of that, she throws it out there and says, this is what happened. And here's the proof. And then all of them turn on our PCs as they realize, okay, this isn't the enemy up here, and I'm not going to fight her. And then wizards and thieves and whatever the third guild is that you decide to throw in all attack your PCs, and then you got like multiple opponents in this battle, and you have to figure out, okay, how are we going to get advantage,
Yeah.
space wise, and how are we going to fight them? This just stuff that rolls as I'm thinking, how would I build this into an encounter?
Yeah. Yeah. I really like, and this could probably go either way, whether, we went, I do like the idea of her being the rightful heir, but there's still problems within the situation that we have to deal with and complications. But even if you went a different way, I was like, okay, she's just showing up and demanding lead the rulership kind of thing, and that's not actually true. I think both ways. Like I think of I love I love Zelda games. I love Breath of the Wild is like still one of my top like games, and in that game, a lot of you may know this, you probably played, but like there's like Hyrule Castle is like sitting in the middle of the map the whole game, kind of thing, and there's this like darkness and magic surrounding it, and you're going there, but you're not really strong enough to do that right away, really, kind of thing. And I kind of wonder about the idea of like this person is so like lofty and like powerful that they're kind of like this. The thing happens, you see, oh, this is a person who's like demanding to take over, but they're kind of there. It's not like me as a level 3 ranger is going to be like interacting with this arrogant dragon master, but even like things down in the ground level can be taking place where we're either finding out, oh yeah, like there was a princess of the old ruling family that got ousted at one point and or sent into exile, and what if this is her, and these clues that can lead around, and you can be doing things like in the city while dragon is like perched up on the palace, kind of thing. So I think that'd be fun even to like have it kind of be this, even like a threat in the middle of the game while you're doing more street level things that eventually you're trying to rise to get to the point of you're dealing with these guilds, you're dealing with the actual interaction with this dragon rider and things like that. So yeah, I think you could do a lot. I mean, it could be a stand-up fight too. I mean, you could definitely do that if you needed something. We talked about, and I think we're going to talk a little more about this here, but sometimes you just need to drop something in to like bring some action and some like more complexity to the situation you're in. You know, the guy I talked about last time that broke into the wedding and summoned a dragon and tried to steal the bride, you know, like this could be a similar thing for higher level characters, particularly where it's like, okay, this is going to get serious, but it's not necessarily a long-term thing. But I like the long-term idea better.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always fun to take these encounters and then let them kind of weave themselves as part of the larger story.
Right.
And, you know, we talk about that a lot on here, which goes really well kind of into what our main topic is going to be. And I'm going to go ahead and jump to our main topic part today. And so we've been we're at the third of a 3-part series. So we started, it's kind of this lights, camera, action idea. It was the entertainer first, right? And that is how you put together your story. Let me think here. The entertainer was, I always get confused because I think back to what I thought before I actually looked at them. The entertainer was what part?
That's more the voices and the like sensory kind of things.
Yes, kind of putting the whole room together so that people come in and are immersed, right? So that's the entertainer. And then there was the storyteller we talked about, a week and a half ago now, but last week, if this were on schedule, we talked about the storyteller, and that is putting together what parts?
We had the script that we're bringing into the table, like whether that's big or small and how detailed that is, but those kind of points that we bring in and say, this is the things we're wanting to try to get through in the session. That was like the big part of that, but also some of the like collaborative part of like telling the story together.
Yeah. So it's that whole, what is the story that I'm trying to tell, and then the telling of that. And then the last part of this is the facilitator. And so this is the role of the GM, where you have to kind of make sure the game flows, make sure the game keeps going. And the first part, there's several parts to what it takes to facilitate a game. So you have to have a story, you have to make the environment and kind of immerse people in this place, but you also have to do things like take care of stat blocks and make sure that rules are enacted and make sure everybody knows where they're at and whatever. That's part of this facilitator thing. And we're going to talk about several parts of what it takes to facilitate today. And the first thing I want to kind of touch on that they touch on in this book, Focal Point, is the idea that when you're doing gaming, when you have a good game campaign, it really does require, first of all, before you have to get into all the rest of this, for people to be present. And that doesn't just mean physically, because I know we do some online stuff and we do some in person, but more importantly, the mentally present. And I think this is one of the things we talk about now that probably was not talked about so much when this book was written, is the difference between online gaming and in-person gaming, because that has really boomed, especially over pandemic when so many people were kind of in their own places. I know that's why we stopped doing every week in person and we started doing more online stuff. That's when Roll20 with us really took off. We had used it some before, but it really took off over the pandemic, and now it's become a part of our schedule just because some people live further away, and so it's easier not to every week have to drive and get together. But what I've noticed, and maybe you can speak into this too, as far as what you've noticed, but what I have noticed, and in talking with some of our players, it's a lot easier to be completely mentally present when we're physically present. And when we're online, at least I know with me, but also in talking to some of the others, it's easy to be sitting there online. And then when you're not kind of on, say it's not your turn, somebody else is taking an action or whatever, it's really easy to be distracted by a video game system sitting next to you, or some project over here you're working on, or you're kind of dealing with your kids too, and you see people kind of get up and walk away from the camera. And these kind of things, we do want to allow space for them because life happens, and we have to let people, be able to take care of what they need to in life, especially us. Now, some of you listening to this, you may be college age students, and boy, that's like ideal time for all just kind of, man, you can zone in. But we are now, I think most all of us in our group, not all of us, but most all of us in our group are parents or soon to be parents. And so we have kids that we have to take care of, and we have to help our wives make sure that they're not like overburdened just because we want to go have fun for 4 or 5 hours. Yeah. And so sometimes you have to allow for these things to happen. But at the same time, you want to do the best you can to minimize those times where, because when someone gets up and just leaves because they're kind of bored with what's going on the screen, and they're just kind of doing another project on the side, that really kind of wrecks the game flow. And you get to a place and you're like, okay, well, we're gonna see what this person would do in that situation. Oh, does anybody know where he is? Is he here right now?
Yeah.
Does anybody know if he's coming back soon, or is he, and all these questions. And then you kind of end up stopping and waiting, or you're like, okay, we'll skip that person and come back to them. And when you do, it really kind of throws the whole, you do this thing when you read a book called suspension of disbelief, right? You suspend your disbelief and you put yourself in that place. Well, the same thing happens in a game or in a movie. You suspend your reality for a moment so that you can be totally immersed in this place. Well, when things like this happen, it completely pulls you out. And I think that it's like, have any of you heard of Cal Newport? Listening? Maybe you have. He wrote several great books I recommend, by the way. I'm a big fan of Cal Newport. One of his books was called Deep Work, and it's all about working. He had another one called Digital Minimalism that's also great. You should read both of those. But the deep work, he was talking about, if you're going to do like really meaningful deep work, you have to get down. You have to get down to a certain level of depth in your work in order to really get good stuff done. And those should be like 90-minute periods at a minimum. And he says what happens is our culture especially, so this is how it ties into that digital minimalism, where we keep ourselves kind of distracted regularly. And what happens is we start to go deep into this work, and then we let ourselves get distracted by email or by social media or by whatever. And then in our minds, we think, I'm just going to take a 5-minute break and then I'm going to jump back to deep. But what he says is you don't go back up to the surface and then back down the deep instantly. It does not happen. What happens is you spend a good bit of time getting down the deep, and then as soon as you surface and you try to go back to deep again, it takes a long time to get back down there, or you may not be able to get back down there. Well, that's all talking about work, but it's the same thing with gaming. When you have a bunch of distractions happening, you may think, oh, I'm just going to do something for 5 minutes, then we'll be right back where we were. Well, the problem is it takes a bit to get down to that time of flow and that time of truly immersed game playing, and you can't just jump up and back down into that. And so it's one of those things that you have to kind of really think about, what are the distractions? And I'm going to stop here for a moment and give Adam some time to kind of speak into this a little bit, if you've noticed anything like that, or if you have thoughts about that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. That like breaking of being in the game and in the moment, that's something I've noticed for sure over time. And I think it's not just that's not just like an online situation, but it definitely becomes easier. And I've noticed that with even other, there were other like meetings and different things I would do like on Zoom or, some other Skype or, whatever the video choice is. Skype, probably not Skype, actually. That's forever ago. But
I love, though, that remember when Skype was like the thing in the world,
and this is the only way we can talk.
Became the thing, and now there's people who are like, oh, I love meetings way better than Zoom, and you get people who are like, really, they have preferences. Anyway,
I do think that's hard. It's hard as a GM to like kind of be in the moment and like, oh, okay, I'm ready to talk. And it's like, I don't know everybody's motivations. And I think there's a thing about, this is maybe a physician heal yourself situation, but like we could probably have at our table more discussion about like, okay, like what are the actual um,
The social contract. What are our
social contract
expectations?
that, yeah, they talk
Yeah.
about what are the expectations. Maybe, instead of us all getting up at different times while we're on Zoom to go to the bathroom, what if we said, hey, like an hour into the game we're going to have a break to do that, unless it's a really bad emergency, kind of thing, or those kind of things. But
Where Matthew ate a whole head of cabbage or a whole bag of carrots, and he's like, "Guys, I gotta go to the bathroom. I'll be back."
there's like stuff like that probably could be, we could talk through. I mean, like communication's always the key to all of these things, and but it is hard. And next week we're talking about different ways people have fun, and I do wonder how much that plays into this also, which will make more sense after we talk about it. But like for me, the immersion is super important to me as a player. Like I want to be in the story and thinking about the world and like visualizing this stuff. And so when I'm distracted in that way, it does take a while to come out of it and to come back into it. And last week, I'm running the game, but one of my kids was taking a bath, and then I start hearing water pouring out of the basement ceiling. I'm like, what is going on? Like I'm like running over there, and it wasn't what I thought it was. So that was
It
good.
wasn't as bad as it sounded
Yeah.
just now when he said that.
Yeah, it was not a flood or anything, but I'm like, what is that? And so I had to come back and just like reset, even as a person running the game and trying to do some of these mechanics. But yeah, I think that's hard. I think like paying attention to everybody and having good focus the best we can, keeping people attentive.
I think you hit on a good point there, and they talk about this in the book. There's reasons why people begin to like have a hard time staying involved, right? And one of the first ones they talked about is you as a GM have to think about like where your brain is, because we all have had days that are just like so stinking crazy busy, and we get there and we just don't have any more brain left, and we're trying to run this game, and the truth is fatigue has just hit us today, or maybe we're feeling sick, and that's something you have to pay attention to and know, okay, maybe this is just going to be a really light session and we're going to like hit it more next week, or but there's other reasons that these attention spans can kind of stray, and we have to take a look at those. And it's really tempting as the GM to say it's players' faults. But in reality, as the GM, one of the things you do, one of the roles you take on is realizing that I am responsible. And if I do well at this, I should be able to keep people focused. And so you have to look at a few things. Now, again, if somebody just is constantly getting up and doing a side project or playing a video game on the side, that might be something you say, hey, let's see if we can maybe not do that. But if they're just kind of sitting there and it seems like people's attention keeps straying, even if you're at the table physically, you're at the table and they find themselves scrolling on their phone or flipping through a book or having side conversations. First things you have to do is ask yourself some questions, and that is, am I doing enough to keep them interested? Because what can happen as a GM is you get this idea that you're going to have this cool storyline where there's conversations and, they're going to figure out mysteries and all this kind of stuff. And you're kind of pushing for that to happen, and nobody's really hooking into that. And then it becomes this plodding thing where it's just like he's talking with this other guy like forever, and then he talks to another person, and he talks to me a little bit, but I just don't see where this is going. And you have to like stop and say, okay, am I beating a dead horse here? Is this plotting much too slow? And if so, what do I got to do to speed it up? And we're going to talk in a bit about ways you can do that. Sometimes you have this idea that you're going to have this wonderful puzzle for them to solve. And the truth is you've made all of the clues way too obtuse, too hard, extremely, and nobody's getting it, and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna kind of like give him a little nudge here and here, and nobody's getting it. And you need to just realize, okay, this isn't working and I need to change it somehow. And so I think there is an aspect where as the GM, you have to say, okay, it's not just the player's fault. What might I be doing that is causing this? And I know
Yeah.
one thing that can happen is the idea, and I'm guilty of this. You have one player in the group who is like super role play. They love gaming, and you connect well with them, and you
Mhm.
find yourself, you spend a whole lot of time letting that player do things, and he's exciting, and so you're
Yeah.
like, oh, so what are you going to do when you get on this ship with this captain? And
Mhm.
okay, and so this happens, and you're sitting there role playing with one person, and like six people are all sitting here just kind of watching and listening, and they say it in the book. It's not role watching, it's role
Right.
playing. You come in to be a player, not a watcher. And so if you're not moving the spotlight around and making sure that you kind of touch in everybody's story and you move from this combat to this combat kind of in quick order, or from this investigation to this investigation, they're going to lose interest. And so you have to be aware of that.
Yeah, for sure. You're talking about the obtuse clues. I think about the Michael Scott. Explain it to me like I'm five, like kind of thing. Is that happens? I think sometimes of like, oh man, it's gonna be so fast, and it's like, well, what if it is? Like, what if they do figure it out? They're gonna be like, yes, and that's great. So, I've been guilty of that too, for sure. Yeah, I think like the facilitation. So often I'm thinking about rules, like the rule uh, judgments and things like that of, well, knowing this stuff, I know how these skills are working, or what battle looks like, or what happens when this specific check is made, or those kind of things. And trying to remember those things and learn them, or to make like calls on the fly when it's like there's not a rule for that. So this is how I'm going to be consistent within this and make this call for the night at least, and
Mhm.
doing that and helping people like move around the table and keep that flowing. But those kind of things, as far as like attention and engagement with people, definitely is just as much of an importance to that, because we can know all those as crunchy of rules as we want, but if people aren't like catching on with it, it's not going to go super well. So I do think like communicating those things, trying to figure out like what people's intentions are with that, passing that in the spotlight around, learning how to do that better is all a big part of that.
Yeah, and one of the things they talk about in this book, again, this book is a little bit dated in
Hmm.
that they say, hey, phones and tablets, these things can cause
Hmm.
distractions, and maybe you want to ban those for the evening. Well, we're in a different world now.
Yeah.
At our table, at least, even when we're in person, people pull up their character sheets and stats on a phone or a tablet,
Hmm.
and they may, be researching their spell list on the tablet so they know what they're going to do next. And we find phones and tablets actually are kind of always going to be ingrained in our games
Hmm.
now. And so it's not like this idea that if attention seems to be now, if somebody's on there, like, I'm going to call out one of our players. I'm not going to call him by
Oh
name, but
no.
everybody at our table will know. If somebody is watching like a basketball game on another screen, that might be something where you say, hey,
Hmm.
let's not do that today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everybody listening to this knows who I'm talking about, including the guy. But there's some times where you're going to say, "Hey, let's limit what we're doing to the game."
Hmm.
Yeah, but I think it's a matter of, if they're just on their phones because you haven't kept their attention, then you have to figure out, how do we get their attention back?
Right.
Because what happens is, being on a phone, checking your tablet, your whatever, that's all a symptom of boredom. If
Hmm.
they're super interested, they're not going to be doing that.
Right.
It's when they get bored that they do that. And so how do you get attention back when you've noticed that it's waning? Do you have
Hmm.
anything you do? It's like, okay, everybody seems to be like nodding off. What do you do to get attention
Right.
back?
Right. Couple. So you mentioned okay, like everybody's kind of doing their own thing, and it is easier if someone's like really into what they're doing to like spend time on that. But to like pay attention, one is like just that idea of like, are we aware? Like I think that's a muscle to work out a little bit too, is even just like our awareness of the table. Okay,
Hmm.
these two
Of
guys are
every
having
person.
they're having a conversation over here on their own. They're not engaged at all. this guy is flipping through his phone. This guy literally is asleep. Like, okay, that's a problem.
Literally is asleep.
So, being, I like to, in that moment, like it is that swinging of the spotlight, and the person I'm going to target is the one who looks the most like detached. If, it's like, okay, like what are you doing right now? And like trying to bring them back into the game. So that's going to be, I need to be better. I'm just like confessing all kinds of stuff today, but I need to be better at like being faster.
This is today's episode is Confessions of Two GMs.
Yeah. Being
because this
faster,
is where we all
right. With that like transition. Like I think there, I don't know if a timer is necessary, but like knowing like, okay, we've been like 4 minutes on this. Like maybe we flip over here, leave that hanging. Maybe there's even some anticipation in that conversation. But even like combat, I think there's some ways to, if it's just a slog, like everybody is literally standing there swinging a sword and missing, swinging a sword and missing, swinging a sword and missing, like I think there's ways to resolve quicker, or I get down to the end. Sometimes it's like, okay, there's like one enemy left and it just is people chasing it around the board. This is going to resolve. There's 5 of you and one of them, the victory is set, if this is just about like clearing the room. And, for the sake of time, you guys managed to dispatch that. Let's move on. Cause I think combat especially can get really draggy if it's like, okay, well, it's been 30 minutes and it's not my turn yet because it's just taking a long time. So I think like some of that stuff is swinging that spotlight, making sure to engage. One thing I do like to do that's maybe more something I just have picked up somewhere is even like if a conversation is happening, either like swinging really quickly and saying like, be thinking about what you would do next because I'm going to move over to you. Like letting someone know you're next up on the thing. That's something that I think actually like in combat, going back to like the Sentinels comics RPG, that's a suggestion that they give is like, because it's not a set order in initiative for combat. It's like it gets passed around different places and you kind of decide in the moment where it's going. Right. But for someone to say, okay, I'm about to go, but your character is going to be going next, and then you do your move so they know to be prepared. But I think like within maybe more social stuff that's worthwhile also for the GM to say, I'm going to be coming over to you next when this conversation's over, be thinking about it. Or even kind of just like pausing and asking like a more direct question of like, where is it that you're going to be? So our rogue slipped away. Where are you going? Give them like 30 seconds to explain that. Okay, cool. Like come back. And that kind of stuff, I think if you can bounce that a little more, it does keep people engaged and thinking about, okay, what's my next step too?
Yeah. And I think one of the things we do as GM, we try to like give our people a chance to guide how the play goes. And so they, you go, you tell them all about this tavern they just entered, and they walk in, you're like, okay, what do you guys do? And they're sitting there and they're kind of talking, and then somebody gets on this like, oh, I'm going to order an ale. I love ale. I want 7 ales. And, you're just sitting there and you start to see as this like interaction just goes on and on with this person ordering ales. You see other players just starting to kind of lose interest, and they're sitting. That's one of the things they talk about in the book is get loud voices, right? And I would couple this with, it's kind of like you said, swinging the camera to people unexpectedly. So like everybody's sitting there talking about the ale, and like somebody comes out of the back room, they're like, what are you lot doing here? And they swing down and look at the gnome, and they're like, last time we had someone your size in here, I had my bouncer kick him out with his boot. Is that going to happen again today? And it's like all of a sudden things get loud. Somebody gets like pointed, and everybody's like back there again, because you've got a louder, more excited voice instead of just this long time of like, what are you guys going to do now? Okay, you do. Okay, you got your ales. Things can get to where they need a loud burst and they
Right.
need that camera, you know, and it doesn't have to always be the little, you know, it's like, oh, when was the last time a human in a big old set of armor came in here? We don't like you a lot. Get out, you know, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You swing that camera. And this kind of goes along with another method they use. And I'm going to give credit to this, to the Gnome Stew people, in the Focal Point book, they have this called Ninja Breaks In and start. What is it? Ninja Breaks the Door Down.
Yeah.
That was their title. What the idea is, if things start to get boring, somebody busts in the room and starts attacking. You know, somebody busts in the room and starts shooting. Somebody busts in the room and starts fighting. Whatever it is. And that can be a little, you know, maybe you're not ready for an encounter, but that can definitely be a way to bring people right back to the moment.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, here's an immediate threat, and things just got crazy. And
Right.
sometimes you need that. And you kind of alluded to that when we were talking about the dragon, you know,
Right,
woman at the beginning. It's like maybe the story's going nowhere, and everybody's sitting around kind of half planning and plotting, and nothing's happening, and you're like, suddenly up in the sky,
Yeah.
a woman pops out. I forget what it even said, if she came out of another dimension or if she just came
Suddenly appeared. Yeah.
yeah. So somebody comes in and starts like yelling or attacking or something. That can bring people back.
Yeah. Something that was interesting to me in this Focal Point chapters on facilitating was talking about like a productive group and an unproductive group. I'm not going to read all of it, but just like the topics they kind of talked about. I talked about like a productive group shares a common goal. They respect each PC's role. They're candid but not insulting. They listen to everyone. They collaborate and no one person dominates. Like that's like we're kind of talking about that from the GM and how to like help that. But then an unproductive group, they talk about kind of we're going to see the inverses of those things. Divided or conflicting goals, lack of respect, niche crashing, abrasive and condescending, dismissive, my way or the highway, like those kind of things being like an unproductive situation, you know, in groups. And I think that's like a thing that there's an arbiter, you know, like there's an arbiter a little bit kind of situation with the GM role of like helping people be in a space together, encouraging play together, you know, like, and like, how can we do this more as a team? This is a collaborative kind of situation. So I thought those like lists were pretty good to like think of as far as, does everyone do those things perfectly? Doubtful, you know, but like things to be thinking of if you're a player or a GM, like how can we make them a little bit better, you know, around the table?
Yeah. It's one of those things where collaborative is a big word. Because that's what this game is. It's you guys against the game, not you guys against each other. And I think one of the hardest things for me is when somebody comes in and their character is super secret all the time and constantly has a hidden agenda and won't tell anybody what it is except the GM. One thing I've noticed in our games, we can get too many whispers going on to where people who aren't in the whisper group start getting very bored and start getting what's this all about? Or they feel like, what is this person up to? I'm going to call out our Leonis of the group, who always seem to have I know he listens to this podcast. He's probably going to be listening today and he's going to fire something back at me. But his character is always like, oh, I'm off doing something. And we're like, what? Never mind. And you're like constantly don't know, is this character like with us or is he doing it? Is he just all about his own thing? And like, that's one of those things that you can role play that a little bit, but ultimately your party needs to feel like, hey, we're in this together, not like we're competing against each other. Or, and you talked about this, the idea that it can't be one person shining all the time, you know, just because somebody's good. And I know Leonis is going to say, hey, how about you in this one, Matthew? Because like, when my guy's supposed to be doing a skill, all of a sudden your guy's like, hey, let me roll. Oh, I'm awesome. I'm awesome in this. I'm awesome. And so you can have a guy who's like, maybe he's like good at a lot of things, but you have to, as the GM, know when to say, All right, hey, you're the thief here. I want you to go over and roll a lock check pick,
Yeah.
or a lock pick check. I'll get that right here in a second. Instead of just saying, "Oh, you're a wizard," because you have the wizard who always is like, "Oh, I just cast knock. I open the door."
Right. Yeah.
It's like the thief never gets to do anything because the wizard's just like opening every door and every chest. And so you, as the GM, sometimes need to like just kind of point it in the direction of, okay, I'm going to have you go over to the door. What do you do as it's locked? And the wizard starts to say, "Oh, I have knock here," and say, "Yeah, you have to figure out a way to like
Yeah.
keep that
Right.
one person from dominating just because they can do like everything under the sun. Everybody has a role. You're all part of this group, and how can you
Yeah.
like make it so that everybody gets a chance to do something and to
Yeah.
shine a little bit?"
I do think it's important. And I think this is a later conversation that I want to make note of for future episodes, like episode 103 or something. We have about that many set up. But there is I think it's important to remember the difference between even like character. This is a really big conversation. So it's later, but like character tensions, maybe. I don't know if tensions is the right word, but the we're going to use you guys, the Leonis and Eliakim have some similar sets of skills, and maybe the characters have a one-upsmanship thing, but not necessarily encouraging the players to have the one-upsmanship thing. Like
Right.
that's a very different thing, and I do think there's a pretty massive like GM responsibility in that of like a lot of it's like conversation outside of the game too, where I've been in some situations where the characters are like tense with each other, but like you're done with the session, like that was awesome that like our characters are like at each other's throats right now, but the players are like fine, kind of thing, because
Right.
it's a story, not the reality of life, kind of thing. So I think in those
And
things, like
there's nothing worse than when it's the other way.
yes,
When
right,
when the players themselves are angry at one another
right,
and it's obvious to everyone at the table and everybody's
yeah,
thinking, how do we resolve this? And
yeah, yeah,
we all have to like say that there's been times I can remember back a time when one of our good friends, Evan, brought a friend to to our house, and his friend and I were definitely having some tension in there. And he listens to this podcast also. He can probably like look back and say, "Oh, I remember that. That was awkward for me." And afterwards, you just have to like say, "Man, I failed there. That was so out of character for me to get so like
right,
personally riled up."
yeah, right,
And then you have to like look back and say, "Okay, I'm going to have to do better at this in the future." And so if you mess up at that, take it as a like look back and say, how could I grow from that?
right, yeah,
And
yeah,
so, in that case, his friend was just trying to like make sure we had the rules straight. And I was seeing it as no matter what I try to do, he's telling me I'm doing it wrong. And he's like nerfing everything I do.
yeah,
And,
right,
there was a conversation that we needed to have like outside of the game, but it was like, uncomfortable for everybody sitting at the table.
yeah,
And
right,
those times when that's happening as the GM, you have to recognize this is happening and know, how can I begin to diffuse
hmm,
this like anger between these two players, or
yeah,
this one-upsmanship
right.
kind of thing.
There's I think that's like a really good situation where it's like, hey, let's take a. It kind of depends on how deep this is going, but I do think there's a point where maybe even like taking a pause and like, hey, let's resolve the actual meta like stuff
Yeah.
that's happening here, and like kind of come to a conclusion. Let's communicate well. That was something, thinking, kind of moving a little bit different train of thought. Like they talk about like table, like safety at the table,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And there may be things that someone may like, they may be bringing in like trauma from their life, and something just kind of offhandedly is used in the game, and it's like, oh, that's like bringing up real life stuff for me. Or I mean, even as like one of the Sentinels modules that I run is the enemy is the villain is made up of a bunch of bugs, And it
Hmm.
even has like a warning at the beginning, like, hey, if you have massive problems with bugs everywhere, probably this isn't for you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And some of those, and I think that's like, it made me think of that because those are moments too where I think some, like, if there's a problem, like, let's communicate at the table. Let's take a step back for a second. We need to communicate. We don't need to go down that line of thinking like this game is a game and we can edit, kind of thing, if that's a problem. So that
Right.
made
And
me think of that too.
that does kind of bring us to that kind of safety at the table idea.
Mhm.
I know that a lot of this has to do with how well do you know your group. Our group, and maybe this is the situation some of you out there find yourself in. We've known each other for a long time, and we really have a sense of what each other's boundaries and kind of what's okay and what's not okay.
Yeah.
And so it rarely comes up that that's like a problem for us. But if you're in like a convention setting, or if you're in a group where you've just been invited, or some people you don't know very well, or you're part of a gaming group on a campus, and it's like whoever wants to show up to that, there can be some wildly different like lines in the sand of,
Yeah.
well, we
Right.
don't really go past that. Like in our group here, we all like one day we were like, whoa, a little bit when one of our people is like, oh, I put his face down with his eye next to a spike, and I tell him I'm going to run this through his head unless he does this, and then all of a sudden we're like, whoa, this is like very torture-esque, and we all kind of joked about it because he didn't do that,
Mhm.
he didn't like shove this guy's head, which would have started to be like, who are we?
Yeah.
is,
Right.
is
Right.
this really where we want to
Mhm.
explore as a gaming group?
Right.
And that maybe is not that radical of a place, but it's a place that we would all have to be like, do we really feel comfortable being the kind of people that we're? I don't know if I want to get into torture, or if I want to get into this or that. And I know some groups will get into things that are more sexual in their gaming, and that may not be comfortable for everybody in the group, and you have to like figure that out. In our group, we don't go to those places. That's just who we are as a group. That's not a place we go to
Right.
in our gaming. But you have to like think about that. We had a player once who would constantly pull out his phone. Maybe this is part of the boredom and phone thing, but he was always wanting to show videos that were a little bit inappropriate for one reason or another, whether it was kind of maybe sexually or politically or whatever. He would
Mhm.
show this, and we would all be like, and none of us knew how to say, this isn't what we want to be as a
Right. Yeah.
group.
Yeah.
And we eventually found ways to resolve that. But like, it's one of those things that you have to think about. What's our group dynamic at the table? And when it's a group of friends, maybe that's a little easier to go unsaid because
Yeah.
you all just kind of know. If it's a group of people that you don't know so well, maybe it's one of those things you have to upfront. We talked about that social
Yeah.
contract and expectations. You have
Mhm.
to say, hey, okay, let's all pause for a second. What are we feeling on this kind of thing in the game
Yeah.
world?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
For sure.
discuss that, and you have to come to a conclusion.
Mhm.
And as the
Yeah.
GM, you're the one who has to kind of make that call instead of like letting everybody sit there and suffer. You have to say, hey, everybody, let's stop for a second.
Mhm.
I know that we haven't really talked about like, what do we think about torture, or what do we think about things that are more sexual in a game? Is this something that we want to allow? And is everybody okay with that? Because this is something that we have to be okay as a group going
Right.
forward if
Yeah.
we're going to do these kinds of things, whatever that would be.
Yeah. In that realm, I like to, there's kind of like some standard, it's not like I have a list, but there's things that come to my brain a lot, especially when we're starting a new game, or I just like to remind myself, and I keep going back to next episode when we talk about the types of fun. That's a question I like to ask a lot to people, and probably have
Right.
asked all our group like way too many times. Remind me
Which is
again
a
what your type,
great topic, by the way. If
yeah.
you're going to tune in next time, we're going to be on here again Thursday, and we're going to
Mhm.
talk about this, and it is a really good topic. But
Yeah.
go ahead, Adam.
But there are some other things about like uh what you're interested in, what are you not interested in, that I think come up sometimes. And I don't remember the reason. But I do remember recently, and now that I say recently, within the last 2.5 years or so, that I remember specifically asking like our current group, um, like, this is kind of a thing that this is going into. I typically am not trying to jump into like edgy stuff, so this was a little different for me. but to just ask outright to each of them individually or as the group, like, hey, if this is like not where you're wanting to go with a topic or something, like please talk to me, like let me know that, because I don't want to make people uncomfortable. But this right now is part of the way that this character plays out or something like that. And so that was good to have that conversation. Like for us, it was pretty cut and dry as far as the answers I got to that. And it was like, all right, I'm going to move on from with knowing that. So I think, yeah, in your like regular groups, if you got regular groups, I think it's really good to touch base every now and then with things, or if you're like, maybe this could be a thing. What I'll say is, like I'm helping run some games on our campus here, and because that's like a not a regular group of people. There may be regulars, but it very much churns over and can be new people every time. They have it's not a group contract thing, but it's like you kind of fill out a little profile when you come in to play.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like on record for the GMs to see. So when um like this girl sits it down at my table, I can like open up what she's filled out and know like, okay, she does not want to talk about that thing, and I think that that can be a really
Right.
good tool, to just know, like, again, I don't often like try to veer into stuff. I don't I don't even know what to say, but I don't even know what's gonna like, not be wanted by people. So that helps when you're in a group, definitely, that's not your regular people, is to just have some table safety, like take care of people. You're here to have fun, and we facilitate that too.
Yeah. Hey, I want to jump into kind of the last big part of this facilitator role. And that is when you get to the place where, okay, so we talk a lot about as a facilitator, yes, you are going to have to do some prep, right? You're going to have your monster stats. You're going to have your maps or an idea of what your maps are going to be. And that's all part of facilitator that we didn't really talk too much about. But I think every GM knows, okay, if I'm coming in tonight and we're going to have like, a major, orc giant and like three, orc mages and like some, lesser orcs, I've got to have the stat block for each one of those things so that I'm ready. Okay. I think that's kind of known. That's part of facilitating. But there's an idea of getting to a place where your prep goes down. I think Adam talked about like when he first started, he would like write out manuscript of what conversations were going to happen and what was going to happen here and there next, and and he ends up writing like 14 pages of manuscript
Yeah.
going into a session. Well, there comes a place where as a facilitator, you begin to learn and teach your group the idea of improvisation, right?
Mhm.
Improving as you go through the night, which brings prep time down. Now, are you ever going to totally get rid of prep time? No, you still need to have an idea of what kind of things are going to happen, and you need to have an idea of like stat blocks. Although we've talked in here about apps and programs that can kind of help you grab stat blocks on the fly, but this idea of improving is where I want to hit here in the last part of today, and that is the idea of learning to play off of one another as a GM in a party, but whether that's, with a couple people in your party or the whole group. It's sometimes you find a player. There is a certain amount of technical expertise that comes with improving, right? And you have to like know how to listen to one another and build off of one another. And sometimes you find one person in the group you can do that with well. When you get to where your whole group can do that, that's when things really begin to gel and feel really like you guys are creating together. And they talk in here a little bit about some of the things you can do to kind of help build that improving. And they list, I think it's 4 different ways. They call it the yes and, the yes but, the yes so, and the yes or. And I want to talk just a little bit about each one of those before talking about some ways to do improving questions. The yes and I'm gonna say these all kind of slowly so that if you're a GM, you can kind of either jot these down or think about these on your own. The yes and is when, whether it's you as a GM or they as a party, when you guys get to the point in your improving where you can say, here's something that happened. You walk in and, this redheaded fiery dwarf stands up and gets in your face. And then they can take that you threw out there and say, yeah, he gets up and stands in my face. And then this happens and this happens and this happens. Okay. So you're saying, yeah, this happened, what you said, and here's more. Basically, this is extending that kind of improvisational thing you're building. Okay. The second one is yes, but. So that's where you throw this thing out there. You're like, okay, this person comes up here and they say, there's a dwarf gets up in your face and he's angry. And you're like, yeah, he gets up in my face and he's angry. But right at the same time, 5 big guys walk in from outside and they start like glaring at everybody in the place and the dwarf is distracted. Okay, so now they're taking what you had begun and they're throwing some obstacles in the way of that, right? So yes, and extends. Yes, but is like, okay, here's what you. I'm not saying no to what you did, because that's one of the parts of improv that you don't want to do. It's just like, no, what you said's dumb. Instead, this, that's never what you want. So you say, yeah, that happened, but here's something else that happened that maybe is an obstacle. The yes, so is the consequences, right? Yes, so says, okay, this gets up and happens. And so because of that, here's a development. Okay. The person who was going to become the queen is now dead and we have to, whatever. They throw something out there. They're taking this story and they're saying, okay, what you said happened, but because of that, now here's some consequences. And then the last one is the yes or, and that's really giving some alternatives. So you say, yeah, the stuff you said happened and we dealt with it however we did, or maybe this happened at the same time, yes, or, and that gives some alternatives. And that's kind of one of those that happens. And, it's like, as we're getting ready to do something, here's some alternative paths we see. So yes, and you basically extend an idea that somebody else kind of improvisationally throws out. Yes, but is, yeah, I like what you're going with, and here's some obstacles in the way of that. Yes, so is, okay, yeah, we're gonna go with what you said, and this is used as we're gonna go with the things you guys said. So because of that, here's some consequences that now have come about. And then yes, or is, okay, I see where you guys are going with this, but here's some other options that you didn't notice. Which one are you going to choose? And so you build off of, and you basically give them some doors to choose between.
Right.
These are some good ways to do alternatives, and it's a cool way to do like a scene building. I think in the past I've done it with somebody. Maybe it was with our group. I feel like I don't know what other group I would have been with when I did this, but where we actually wrote down yes and, yes, but, yes, so, and yes, or on pieces of paper, and we handed them out to people. And we would start, one person would start, maybe this was backstory writing, where we did this. So one person would start with like, here's what's going on in the backstory. And then the person would turn over their paper, and whatever they had, they would have to do it from there. And so that might be yes, but, or yes, so, or yes, or, and then they would be like, okay, yeah, the orcs did attack your family and kill everybody. So, and then they had to come up with whatever the so was. And then they would, talk about like, so you then went on to become a person who carried this vendetta, and you ended up getting in like a fight with a bunch of orcs at a bar, and you lost one arm. And so now you only have one arm. Okay, this is like really, maybe not the best example, because you want to let characters get their own players' backstory. But it is a neat way to do like a scene build or an encounter build. So as you're going through the encounter, people like have to come up with an and, an or, a but, or a so.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
I'm going to jump to this next part, and Adam can jump back and talk about any of this, but I know that he does some of this next part well, and that is improv questions. Okay, so sometimes as you're going, instead of just being the GM who says, okay, I'm going to run you through, and here's what happens, and I tell you what happens, and then you guys do something, in response to it. And that is, you can ask some different improv questions. The first one is the pointed questions. And I know Adam does this one. And so the example they give in the book is the GM looks and says, "Hey, why does the mayor's champion always look at you with such anger in her eyes?"
Hmm.
Okay, so these people are standing here, and he just turns around to one of the players, and he's like, "Hey, Ozoff, how come it is that the mayor's champion is glaring at you?"
Hmm.
And then you let him come up with why. And
Yeah.
then you begin to play off of that. And that might start a whole new section of what's going on between the
Mhm.
mayor and Ozoff that you would have never come up with, in
Yeah.
your gaming. The second question is, what's going on? Okay. So you just look at a player and you're like, hey, what's making all the ruckus at the tavern as you guys are trying to enjoy your evening ale? You guys all sit down for ale and there's like some big ruckus going on. What's going on over there? And you just ask one of the characters this out of the blue, and then they're like, "Oh, yeah. Well, what happened is a bard was over there, and he started singing a song about like a filthy orc, and two orcs really kind of got angry about it, and they started like, yelling and throwing stuff
Right.
around, and just when the bard was like getting ready to come back at him, yeah, and then they make up something. I mean, and you would so basically what you're doing is you're teaching your players
Mhm.
to improv. You're teaching them to come up with stuff, and then you kind of come back with things so that that begins to play out. There's one more question, then I'm going to throw this over to Adam, and that is the what happens next. All right.
Mhm.
The guards look to be offloading a locked trunk from the carriage. What happens next? You just ask one of your players.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
got this big locked trunk. They're pulling out of this expensive looking carriage. What happens next? And
Mhm.
then you let them go with it. And so I know Adam, he has done this a lot where it's like, okay, oh, the person rolls really great. And it's like, you do this. What happens when you
Right.
hit them? What
Yeah.
does that
Yeah.
look like?
Yeah.
That's part of this. But Adam, what experiences have you had with these kinds of improv questions?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely. So we talked a little bit about this back in the get to know us kind of episodes, but um, the initial game that I played in as a player in an RPG, there was a lot that was um, you got kind of rewarded, if I can pull the right word, rewarded for like illustrating what you're doing, kind of things, and
Hmm.
not just like I walk up and stab it with a dagger. It's no, I leap onto the table and jump off the chandelier and parkour off the wall and come slashing down across its chest. Like that kind of thing. There was a little more. It's like that's awesome. You get a +2 to your attack. Like that kind of stuff would happen. And I
Right.
think that like I love when that just happens, with people playing. It's a thing that's really important, I think, for the GMs to do. Maybe not bog the game down, but like be illustrative with what you say. We've talked about that all that stuff, but um, those kind of things I think lead into me wanting people to explain to me. So I do ask that a lot of like, what does it look like as you attack? Particularly if someone's like, well, I shoot a scorching ray at the hobgoblin and for 17 to hit, and it's like, well, okay, what's it look like as you do that? And then they can be like, well, I throw my hand forward and a blast of energy flies from it and smacks the hobgoblin in the face. Like you can get them to kind of draw into that more. I do like that a lot, and just seeing, because people think about things differently too, and even like what I would explain it as may not be what they're seeing as they're casting that spell, or you know hitting something with their whip, or whatever that be. So I do like the like, what does this look like, the what happens next, of like talking about a scene or like an action that's taking place, and like what do you do as a character in this moment, and like let them be a little more broad than just like whatever the typical mechanics, action, bonus action, move, kind of thing are, but like let's get a little more into this. um when people do that, I think it's the stuff you just talked about with the yes and, yes but, yes so, yes or, those kind of come into play with that too, and make it develop a little more too, where someone's like, I want to do this, 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 and this. It's like, action economy does not support this is like what's going in my brain. Sometimes that happens where it's like, that's like 2 rounds, maybe 3 worth of energy, but that is like super cool. I don't think it's going to break the game. So yes, but this is a situation that takes place because of that, or those kind of
Right.
things. That definitely ties into when players are doing that. And I love that, be able to bounce back and forth and build it together. The pointed question, you mentioned that is something I like to do. That comes more and more naturally for me. The what's going on though, I love that idea. I think I just registered. I took a screenshot of this page earlier, but I'm just now registering that thought, like as you read that.
Yeah.
And I really like that, for the session's opening scene, ask a player what's going on right at the moment and then play off that answer. And that is putting some trust, of like, I'm letting you, the player, decide what this opening scene looks like. And then we have to improv. But I think there's some cool back and forth that can happen with that too. And that's something I'd like to make use of. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
and it
like those
goes back
questions.
to what we talked about at the very beginning of this is when people's attention start to wander. These
Mhm,
kinds of questions can make a difference. You
for
say,
sure.
you notice that your human warrior he's just not into this game.
Right.
And then so you step into a tavern and there's a beautiful woman on the stage who was just getting ready to start singing and the music's playing, but there's this obvious hesitation and she's looking right at you and you realize that she's supposed to have started singing, but she didn't. Why is that happening? Why is she like that? And then all of a sudden they're like, you find out like what it is that they're kind of looking for in the game. The whole, why is the mayor's champion glaring at you? And then that pulls them in and they get to like kind of they get to feed you with, hey, here's something that can hold my attention.
Yeah,
Here's
for
something
sure.
that can bring me into this
For
more.
sure. A great time to do that is if you're moving into somebody's backstory. Like uh, Ozoff in our game was a guard, guard of the city. That was kind of
Mhm.
some of his backstory. And it's like, okay, you're moving into this area that like well. Talk to me about like what this looks like, what the feel of it is, like hearing some of that from that player, that character's interpretation of what's going on.
Yeah.
I think about, this is future, but like I'm assuming one day your character Matthew's gonna come home, in this game. Maybe that there's a plan for that. And that moment when you're walking into the city or to your like home, that's needs to be more on you explaining. I want you to explain what am I seeing, not me to come up with something and then you're like, oh man, I totally had a different view of
Right.
what that looked like as my players or my character's home. So different things like that I think are really important, and that connects the backstory a lot with those characters too.
And so as the GM, you keep people from getting bored. You help people improv at the game. And again, you remember that as a GM, your goal is to have fun, to create memorable times that people look back and tell stories about, right? And so, yeah, you do have to do the things like no stat blocks, but you also don't forget about these moments of improv because those are the places where people really like shine and
Sure.
really remember those stories. There is one last, I said, the last big section, but there is one last section here, and that is the idea of rules. And you kind of talked about this earlier. Sometimes you find yourself like trying to make sure okay, what's the rule on them holding their breath and attacking at the same time? What's the rule of if somebody's trying to climb and and you've got all these rules. A couple quick things here before we jump into our NPC and kind of in this episode. One, if you know certain rules are going to be coming up, study those before you play. Okay. If you know you're going to be like fighting underwater, look at the underwater combat rules before you start your session. Just
Thanks for the
brush up
reminder,
on
by the
them.
way.
Are we doing that soon? Oh yeah. But anyway, yeah, look at the rules that have to do with, or if you always forget, like, how does concentration work again? Write that rule out on your GM screen or on your tablet or on your little
Right, right,
note
right.
card there. So you have that one handy all the time if it's something that you just never can seem to remember. So that's one. here's another thing that has to do with good facilitation, and that is, I know that there's some people who love rules. And what you do, remember I talked earlier about how I got angry at this guy who was what I called the rules lawyer. Man, it just seemed like no matter what happened, he was like, well, actually, this is the way it works. Actually, this is, oh, you can't really do that. And I was like, raw. So as a GM, though, you learn to turn that person from the rules lawyer, the person who's always like policing everybody, into your rules expert.
Yeah,
And
right.
this is great. As the GM, I am like all about storytelling and improving, and I'm very not as good about like, what's the extra rule on this, but I am really good at delegation. And so I'm like, hey, Adam, why don't you look up what that means when somebody's underwater and they're trying to swing a sword? And while he's doing that, and I go on with some action, and then I have my good old rules lawyer, which I'm not saying that Adam is a rules lawyer, but he is good at looking stuff up and knowing where to find stuff, which I'm not always. And now with Google around, it should be a lot easier for all of us. But have somebody else jump in and kind of look that up and then say, okay, so what is that? And they're like, they read the rule, and then we just play by that right there. And I didn't spend a lot of time like bogging down or stopping the immersion of our session by stopping and saying, hold on, everybody, while I look through a book or Google something online. I delegate that off to somebody and let them do that. And one of the things they talk about is having helpers, right? So you allow people in at your table to do more things than just sit there and like talk about their character. You're like, hey, I need you to erase the mat here real quick because I'm getting ready to draw a new scene.
Yeah.
Can you just go ahead and get all this off of here? And then while he's doing that, you go ahead and be talking, finishing up the last scene or setting up the next scene. And then when they get it all erased, you start drawing and talking. You may even have somebody else draw it up if you have a map, but that might be a little hard. But like delegating out things. One of the things I love to do is, saying, all right, I'm going to have you roll every time I tell you that there's like a mini earthquake. I want you to roll 10d6 and add those up because that's the damage everybody's going to take. And that way you're not rolling and counting. You can hand some of these things off as a GM, and that's part of the facilitator role, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great.
And so, yeah, the rules thing, know your rules, but also don't be afraid to let other people help you with those rules as you go, right? Is there anything else about that you want to talk about before we get into our NPC for the day?
I think for now, let's talk about the NPC.
Let's talk about the NPC. Adam,
So
you take
if there
that
was
part.
lots of weird noises and things, my power all just kicked back on. So huzzah.
Hey, I guess I do see that light that came on in the background.
It kind of startled me, honestly. So anybody watching on the video, I'm like, yeah. So yeah, moving on. I think it's really good stuff, and definitely, I think coming back around to some of that, particularly, there's so much in all three of those things. But again, a focal point by Gnome Cast, Gnome Stew. Find it. I highly recommend checking that out. There's a lot of great stuff that we're never going to even be able to scratch the surface of. So that's really good stuff. But looking at our NPC, this is from Masks, the book from them too. This is Carissa Lawbringer, the iron-fisted guard captain. To the stocks for disrespect, overnight should cure him, she says. Her appearance, she always sways in beautifully polished boots and ermine-trimmed half-cape hinting at soft curves, and wears the badge of a guard captain. Classically beautiful, her pale features and ruby lips excite strangers and terrify the people of her district. For role-playing, she loves to provoke people and make them jump. She slaps gloves into her hand and sensuously teases before cracking a club against a desk or a wagon, always watching the eyes. Is this one prey or a fellow predator? Her personality, she revels in control, pushing ruthlessly when she has the advantage. If she lacks the edge, she quips a one-liner and exits, arranging for the next meeting to be on her own terms, unpredictably keeping her foes wary and on their back foot. Advantage must be exploited to its limit before it's spent. Her motivation is that she burns to eradicate criminals who are barely better than beasts in her mind. The background, the reason for this is a highwayman killed her father. Her mother was abused by the person that she turned to for bread and to feed her family. And Carissa swore to end vice and enlisted with the guard garnering respect for her determination, and rocketed up to the position of captain over the city's poor district. Lacking the funding and men to keep her rough district in order, Carissa uses fear to make up the difference as Carissa Lawbringer.
Yeah, so she's like, she's somebody who's on the side of justice for sure because of what happened to her family. But the way she does that is almost through like such forceful nature
Right,
that people
right.
are afraid of her. And you know, for me, I was telling Adam before this, I realized I have a lot harder time like characterizing people who are like good
Mm,
because my natural tendency is to play chaotic neutral people in my life, or I can like imagine like what an evil person would be like. But when
mm,
somebody just gets good, it gets harder. But what saves it for this NPC for me is that she does good by way of aggressiveness
right,
and,
right.
and almost causing fear. And so
Mm,
it would all be about the like kind of aggressive, pushy toward my PCs, even when they're trying to do good. She's like pushing to get them off kilter to see where they're really at. And then that quick retreat if she doesn't have the edge, you know, that kind of turn on her
right,
heel,
right.
leave, and then she'll be back, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I like that. You know, they talk about the ruby lips and the piercing eyes. It's like she uses even her beauty as a weapon in her goal to like get her, you know, to push people to see where they're really at.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like the chess match kind of thing that she has going on there of like, okay, they've won the point, but I'm gonna pull back and win the battle here, you know, with somebody, even if it's a social interaction or those kind of things. I think about like our party, and I feel like this is one of those people that are immediately going to be hated. You know, that like I just like trying to think about like if I put this
Hmm.
person in front of our Thursday crew, uh, though I've been surprised before about, you know, who gets adopted and who gets like hated on. So you never
Right.
know. But I feel like the attitude, like anytime there's maybe arrogance or superiority, our group, at least the group of characters we have right now, are immediately going to kick against that. So I feel like she could end up like, enemy is like a harsh term because she is supposedly doing good, but we also, in some ways, we have a person like this who is in part of Ozof's backstory, and he, like the captain of the guard, Captain Obadiah, is it's like get it done, and but I think he's even more of a jerk than what she's being turned out to be,
I
you
was
know, kind
thinking
of thing.
more of, and I can't even remember her name. The place where I can't remember. This is going to be such good air here because I can't remember anything. There was a place that was Golden something, not the Golden Lyceum. That's where we're at now, but it like
Oh, the
got like,
burnished citadel.
yeah, and it got like a big hole, and
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
the woman who was in charge,
hmm,
she kind of reminded me of this. She
yeah, yeah,
brusque
right,
and almost not trusting of us,
hmm,
but she's doing, you know, what's right and good,
right, right,
and you know,
yeah,
I think that sort of thing can lend throughout like a campaign because you got this person who doesn't trust your
hmm,
NPCs. And kind of forceful against them, but at the same
yeah,
time, they can kind of see, okay, she seems to be doing like what's right all the time, but that doesn't mean we like her, and
yeah,
yet
yeah.
she doesn't trust us. And I think you
Mhm.
can play with that through. It's one of those tools you have as a GM. This person can come in and kind of push your team off kilter and challenge them, and then just
Right,
exit. And it's like
right.
then they have to decide what to do.
Yeah,
And
yeah. This is I feel like an inner party tension person too, because depending on how you're kind of built as a character, it's like there may be
mhm,
people who are like, yeah, lawful.
right,
This is how you do it. I love this person, you know, and we're going to work together well, where you do have the chaotic, neutral, chaotic, even chaotic good, or like, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, like some things can slide. There are like complexities to, you know, like that kind of thing. And I think that could even cause some of that within the group of like who likes this person, who doesn't. But
And it
yeah,
could even be according to personality trait. People who are not like big planners and they like to kind of be told this is what you need to do next,
right,
and they want to do that, versus people who want to take control and don't want to be told what to do.
right,
They're going to have very different reactions to her, because she's going to come in and be like, okay, here's what needs to be done. I need you guys to do this. And like some people are going to be like, okay, yeah, we'll do that. Others are going to be like, just because she said it, I'm not going to do it,
yeah,
because
right,
nobody
right,
tells me what to do.
yeah, yeah. I love. I don't know. The more I'm looking at that these guys all put together, like I love just this idea of. I mean, it's nothing new, but like all these people have background to them. Like they don't need to be
Mhm.
flat people that just there's things that drive them. We talked about the motivations before, but like I just love even there being a revelation at some point as they've interacted with this person about like what happened to her.
Right.
And
Because then
that
that
being
changes the way
right.
you interact with and
Yeah.
interpret everything she's
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. Especially if like everybody hates her and then it's like, well, this is what she's coming from and why.
Especially, how did it say her parents were killed? I don't have it in
The
front of me
father was
here.
killed by a highwayman, and actually, her mother. It doesn't say she died, but she was abused, and she was
By
by the person that they turned to help for help,
Yeah.
like
And
basically
so
for food. So, yeah,
yeah, and so maybe, like they come upon like this group of highwaymen, and like they just don't seem like they're that bad of people, but then
yeah,
this
right.
little piece of the story comes out, and like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
suddenly like your party like has a whole different look on
right. Yeah.
highwaymen and what we're going to do to highwaymen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, when she
Yeah.
shows no mercy to specific people, I it's gonna something's gonna click there. So it's interesting for sure. I like her.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, thank you all for joining us. I think that's going to, oh, wait, I'm going to stop real quick, because this is what we can do. We have some haversack questions, a couple
Yes.
of them anyway. We're not going to spend a ton of time, but before we get into that great music and end, let's hit at least one question from the haversack.
Okay.
We have like a little bit of a backlog, and we're not going to get them all today, but Adam,
Yeah.
bring us up a question from the haversack, or
Yeah.
maybe two if we answer it really fast.
Okay. So Wataya Hotel 98 had sent one in quite a while ago. So sorry for this that it's late, but some of these are going to be coming out later as they
Right.
go. But he says this. Hello, Matthew and Adam. I hope you're both doing well on this fine day. Lately, I've started running a weekly game of the Fallout 2D20 RPG system with my brothers, and we've been having a blast. My question is this: how do you encourage character development at the table? Even though it's just three people, it can still be hard for us to develop their characters when we get caught up in the banter or combat. So one thing I've started doing is sending out texts with what I am calling quote character questions, which asks each of them about their character and how or why they reacted in a certain way to something that happened during the previous session. In your games, how do you both go about encouraging your players to develop their characters? Thanks for all the wisdom and fun. Sincerely, Wataya Hotel 98. So the big
Yeah, I
question
think,
being, oh, go ahead. Go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think just what you said there, that stuff, you get them to engage their minds in their character between sessions. Because sometimes you can like, okay, so Adam said at some point in our current campaign, Eliakim, which is my character, is going to go home. If he were to say, all right, we walk into your home, what does it look like? Well, I'm not, sometimes I can come up with something, and I can definitely make stuff up on the spot.
Mhm.
But if he were to say, think about the like what your house looked like and how that influenced like your family dynamics, and then he said something like that to me in game,
Yeah.
it would give me a chance to think about like what are the relationships, and how were those like illustrated in our home life, and then here's what our home looked like. Like I would have thought about that. I think that thinking between sessions is huge for a character. We used to do this thing where we would occasionally have people write just a small paragraph or two about your backstory, like something, that your character does. And when I would do those sorts of backstory things like between sessions, it's not really a backstory. It's not like your character creation where you write this whole, like, here's who I am. It's these little ongoing things that like bring out parts of my character. That's for me And it may help, the people who know me if they read these things. But when I write those sorts of things, or when I'm asked that question and I have to think through it, then I begin to play my character differently. And it's like, it just, everything becomes more 3D. So I love what you're doing about like sending out questions between sessions
Yeah, for
and
sure.
asking them. Adam, you were getting ready to say something when I cut you
Yeah.
off.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, I think that's really great. That's a really good way to do that. Putting decisions in front of people is going to be a big way for them to like, what would my character do in this situation? Uh, do I save the puppy or the kitten? I don't. That's a horrible thing, but like putting those decisions in front of them and making sure that everybody's comfortable with what you're doing there. But to kind of harken back what we talked about earlier, but those kind of things, or even like, okay, here's two, like, I don't know how Fallout works exactly, but like, here's two missions or jobs or something like that, that both have some weight to them. Like, which one do you actually care about and why? Or just in the moment, of moral dilemma may be a little strong, but even some of those things helps a character kind of flesh out of like what what is actually important to me as a character. Um, so I think that's good, like to give those decisions. I really like the out of game session stuff, like Matthew was talking about, where and what you're doing, Wataya, that like uh, just letting them think on their character more and come up with those things. But I think
And
just
we
giving process,
we
allowing them to
mentioned
do
it
that.
here earlier, but those kinds of questions, like you step in and you notice that this person's glaring at you.
Yeah.
Why? And
Mhm.
then they come up with something, and that inevitably develops their character and some connection in the world that they have to come up with. And then they probably begin to think of their character and these people they're interacting with differently because of that. So you're developing kind of who they are in their own words by asking them some of those improv
Right.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's good.
Okay.
Um,
What else? Do we have any others for today?
yeah. So we had an email from Evan in the Haversack, Evan Bright, and he love his title, Haversack Questions Batch 9 through 14. I think we can hit some of these pretty fast, but we may need
Okay.
to save on some of them. The first is, what's an example of a house rule you've used and what made it good fit for your table?
Okay. Hmm. I mean, when I think of, I know that in campaigns, typically when I was running Pathfinder, I like everybody to be amazing.
Yeah.
To me, good stories are made when everybody feels awesome. And so I would do this thing where I'm like, okay, the one rule we're going to do throughout this whole campaign is you're going to get a feat every level instead of like a feat at every fourth level or whatever it is. That's not the same as like kind of a house rule. I mean, it kind of is, but that's more of like this is the way I'm going to run the game. It's going to be high magic. It's going to be high ability, and I
Yeah.
just adjust my GMing and the people they come against accordingly. Because you don't want to. We're so powerful, we knock everybody out with one hit, no matter what they are. You know what that
Yeah. Right.
all the time. Sometimes you want that, but yeah. So I don't know. There's probably other things that I'm not thinking about right now. And if Adam brings up a few house rules, he and I play in so many games together, I'll be like, oh
Right. Right.
yeah,
Right.
here's something.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure this was an Evan house rule. So I'm answering your question with something I think you brought to the table anyway. uh, but for everyone else to hear, there are times where I've really enjoyed what is called the escalation die. And I don't know
Oh
where that
yeah.
originated. But the point was to like help with laggy combat, where round one, everything's straight up, but you have this D6 that's sitting over beside, the DM or something. In round two, the D6 flips to a one. That means every attack by the players or any named characters that they're fighting gets a +1 to the attack roll.
Damage also
I think it was just
attacks.
attack, because the point was like, you don't want to get into that. We always joked around like, the game Morrowind, for the first like 10 levels of your character, you'd run around and these bird things would attack you, and you'd just be like a
Swiping that
king.
sword.
You're just like missing constantly and hitting every 5 times. And you don't want that like that is not fun to be doing in an RPG when you have like, I swing my sword once, I miss. Okay,
Next,
I'm gonna sit here,
wait
and
for 7 rounds,
like,
or wait
so
for 6
that
other
was
people to go.
to escalate, the dealing of damage kind of thing. I've used that. I've not used that. I think there's times where that's really helpful.
By the way, that goes up then every time. So the next round,
Yeah,
it's 2 plus 2 to everybody's attacks, and then plus 3. And so by the end, you're at plus 6.
yeah,
That's major. People hitting a lot more.
yeah. You could get crazy and use a D20 instead of a D6. I don't know. Like
Plus
whatever you want to
20.
do.
If a battle goes on for 20 rounds, it's way too long.
That is true. That is true.
Hint
You've
to
heard
all
it
you
here.
GMs out there: don't let your battles go
No,
20
no,
rounds.
please don't. Just have them run away. Speaking of running away, I have not used this, but I'm considering it right now, of being a thing. And I wish I could credit. Somebody has mentioned this, and I would really wish I could credit it. So if anybody has heard who originated this, but it would be getting rid of the attack of opportunity. I've got somebody coming in, so I'm going to pass it back over to Matthew. Any that come to mind?
I'm not sure exactly what this person would have been saying, but it sounds like the idea that if you were up close to an enemy and you run away, they get to attack you. And he's thinking of maybe taking that out so people can be more mobile. I don't know. I've not heard of that sort of house rule, but I can see where it might help in some ways. How would this rule help this? I'm assuming you'd take away attack of opportunities to kind of make people more mobile.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So the idea is that the idea that was posed was, because attack of opportunities exist, nobody's going to move.
Right.
Like, so a battle that probably would be a lot like in real life, which I know reality, it's a game, it's not reality. There's lots of stuff that we have to suspend disbelief on, but like, in a real battle, a real fist fight or something, you're not just going to like walk up to each other, stand in the exact same position and throw punches until somebody falls down, kind of thing. And it would be more dynamic. And there is interest of like jumping on the table, swinging from the rope, running up the wall for you spider climbers, like those kind of thing. But if you are like weighing okay, I'm going to take like 20 damage for running away from this guy if I don't disengage, because the whole point was I wanted to run over there and save my friend and try to kill that goblin, kind of thing. That if you take that away, then maybe there's more opportunity for people to get dynamic and run all over the battlefield and make it more interesting, kind of thing. So I'm like thinking on that. That was, I know that was a content creator on Instagram. I wish I could say who I heard that from, but I can't. So that's what I'm considering right now. Which again, in Fallout, I don't know, or that like Sam, Wataya Hotel talked about, or some of these other games like Sentinels or things, that wouldn't matter at all. That's very much a Pathfinder and D&D kind of situation. So yeah, those are what come to mind.
Yeah, and I've heard of people that like when you roll a 1 on attack, that they'll have like a table they set up that, here's some bad things that can happen, and we're going to, then you roll a D6 and one of these bad things will happen to you if you've rolled that crit fail. And It could be like your weapon breaks or, I don't even know what would be on that table, but those sorts of house rules. And I'm going to think on this, Evan, and because this kind of hit me like just immediately. I didn't think about it before. And so I'll think about this. And as we go through these episodes, you'll probably hear of places where we're like, oh, one thing I do there, and that is interpret, here's a house rule I play. and we'll see if we can pepper some of those into some of these episodes.
For sure. Another question. We'll do this one, and then I think we can hold back on the other ones for the next time, for 2 days from now, or 3. When you start to design the campaign setting, do you tend to start local scale and then expand, start global scale, then zoom in, or jump repeatedly between scales?
This one's easy. at least for me. It's always hyper local, and then it gradually, and this is like so many games, video games and other, stories that you read in books, you start and everything seems to revolve around this one character and maybe the few people he knows. And then it kind of broadens out to the town and what's going on in the town. And then like something gets big and you move to the next town or this. And then before you know it, you're moving continents and you're going. And so it for me, it almost always zooms out. It almost always starts very my character and what's going on here, and then zooms out to where basically this is world changing, even plane changing. I think in the game I'm running, the Dormant Mind, they just went to the 749th level of hell, called Occipitus, and fought a battle, and now one of them is the lord of this level of hell. Which they're not evil, but they basically are going to begin to exert a better influence over this anyway. But that's like a far cry from when they started, and they were just helping a friend in Cotswold, which was the town where they all met, and that was everything was happening in this town, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and now it's kind of worldwide and multiplanar.
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
I have never, I don't think, started anything huge like worldwide and then gone closer and closer and closer. That just, I've never thought like that. That might be a really interesting campaign.
Yeah, that could be cool. My short answer is small to big. Definitely, typically try to start local. I think part of that's just the difficulty of what people are coming against. It's kind of the video game thing where Evan here, we'd play some Guild Wars together, and you're in pre-Syrian, which is basically a practice run where you're doing fighting these little things and doing little quests and learning the game, and then you broaden out, and I think the books we read, I think often that's what we're looking at too. It's what do these characters know, and then how do those worlds get kind of blown up? So I think of something like Icewind Dale, they're very focused in that area of things, but then as that trilogy goes out, it gets bigger and more world. Or one of my favorite C.S. Lewis books, The Horse and His Boy, Shasta is all he knows is the fisherman's hut that he grows up in and maybe the little village that's down the road, but he always is looking north over that ridge, what's over there. And I think about those things of expanding the world out. But there was one specific game where it was it got bigger, and then I actually brought it smaller again. And I want to say the influence probably was the book The Alchemist, which I don't want to give a spoiler for. It's been around for a while, but you should probably read The Alchemist. I think it's worthwhile. But if there's a sense of going and having an adventure, and then there's coming back kind of thing. And I think I may have been reading that at the time, but I liked that where it's things expanded out. They got bigger and more important and global, or regional at least, and they had to deal with these different groups. But eventually there was this point of the climax of the game is actually coming back to where we started, which that also could be a Lord of the Rings thing, because we see that they leave the Shire, they do all the stuff, they come back, and then there's stuff in the Shire where they, finish it. So that's a very possible that was the influence too. But I think that's kind of a cool thing, is coming back to the beginning, and seeing that. But definitely, I could have probably stayed with my short answer, which was small to big.
Yeah, but I like that, small to big to small. That's a good arc. So
yeah.
All right. Well, hey, we are going to sign off now, and we thank you all for joining us for this special edition of Rise of the GM. Do remember to join us in just 3 days. We're going to be talking about different ways that players have fun at a table, and it's a really good one. So join us for that one.
See you later.